Interestingly enough, I've been writing a book for kids on lichens. And it was an endeavor that I was engaged in, proposed by Jurga Doboraitė and Jonas Žukauskas. They're having this forest architecture, maybe you might know, project. And they decided that they need to have something for children written by the people who really are not writers for children, So, and they said, maybe you want to write something on the forest matter. I said, yeah, why not another book? Why not another book in a month? But then I recall my old interest in lichens, and somehow it popped out as the right way to address the question. And the reason why I'm telling this is that lichens are very special beings who coined the discovery of the structure of lichens, helped to conceptualize the idea of symbiosis. The idea of symbiosis was born out of the analysis of lichens. They didn't coin the term, but they help scientists to understand what kind of relation, a specific relation is. And also, interestingly enough, many lichens are able to colonize and to dominate extremely dry environments with high exposure of solar radiation. So they can live in deserts, but also they can live in Arctic or ecosystems or in the mountains. And they've even been brought to the space, to the open space for the sake of experiment, of course. And basically, they've been exposed to the prolonged periods of both solar but also cosmic radiation, more generally. And there were two species of for lichens present in this space. It was, I think, in 2005, the experiment carried out by NASA, but also by a joint group of scientists. And basically what they discovered that these two species, one was Rhizocarpon geographicum, the other I don't remember. It's a very funny name in Lithuanian, geografinis Rhizocarpas. So Rhizocarpon geographicum. So basically these two species, they were not affected at all by this radiation. They are brought back to Earth, and they showed the resistance to these changes in environment. But on the other hand, lichens are very sensible to pollution. They are conceived to be as living pollution indicators at the same time, So they can resist solar radiation, but they cannot stand pollution. So basically, I think that's why, for me, somehow lichen is one of the models of how to live in this and how to understand life and the ways and modalities of life in this very complicated situation, this epoch we're living in, which has a lot of challenges. On the one hand, we have an extremophile being, extremophile symbiotic being, which is not one entity. It's a combination of a few, like 3 or 4 entities, because it's symbiosis of fungus and algae, So basically, it's not one being, and this heterogeneous being can be so resistant to the changes in environment, except those of anthropogenic nature, So it's both for me a metaphor and a challenge and a trigger for imagination, how to approach the issues of contemporaneity under the sun, so to say. I think it's absolutely crucial and fundamental point, and also I would say that lies at the heart of my current interest, how to deal with the problem of observation from the perspective of imagination. Because whenever we speak of any kind of observation, we need also to have in mind that we follow certain framework of our imaginary approach towards the given object or attraction of our sight. So perspective, the modality of perspective is absolutely crucial, and more importantly, if we speak about the problem of oculocentric Western mind, which is based on the idea of classical perspective, which is still omnipresent, let's say not only let's leave alone art field, but if we speak about both science, not only media but also science, science is still very oculocentric, and based on the discoveries of Renaissance perspectivism, which was beautifully demonstrated also by Bruno Latour in his writings. That science relies on the idea of observation that is profoundly embedded in that model of stable observer, at a fixed point, like in Dürer's descriptions or in Dürer's paintings, where you have all the schematics of observation. So the question of how to observe is also the question how to change perspective in a way, or to destabilize that stable point of view. And there are a lot of proposals here. I mean, I speak a bit theoretically as a presupposition of my approach, but I think it implies also the practical elements. So in terms of theory, we have this concept of diffraction that was proposed by Karen Barat and also developed by Donna Haraway. And diffraction can serve as a useful counterpoint for reflection. If reflection, both are optical phenomena, of course. So on the one hand, reflection is based on mirroring of sameness, basically reflection of geometrical forms that are adequate to each other. Whereas diffraction is the phenomenon that comes from quantum physics, this two-slit experiment, the problem of waves and particles and so on. But not going further into the problem of quantum physics, which is kind of complicated, I would say that, and this is the point which is also important for Karen Barat, that diffraction is aiming at mapping the differences. So basically, it does not demonstrate differences; it maps the differences. So it presupposes that the process that is behind the diffraction cannot be represented, and it is dynamic. So and it presupposes differences that are at stake. So basically, your approach towards the difference is to map the points that are the effects of difference. So basically, what you search is the traces of difference in the world, And also the other point is, which is crucial for me here, is the moment of relationality. So vision is always entangled. Whenever you see something, whenever you get into the modality of seeing, you need to question what kind of relation I am entering into. And of course, this proposes the whole new range of choreographies of relations and visual regimes that can be played out here. I can think of Viveiros de Castro, for example, who famously elaborated this concept of Amerindian perspectivism, and this concept of Amerindian perspectivism presupposes a very beautiful way of questioning what is human and what is not, meaning that in certain nations in Amazonia, in their understanding, human is the initial point. So all the animals are ex-humans. So basically, whenever you speak of a jaguar or peccary pig, you can say that jaguars conceive themselves as humans from their point of view. So this is a very nice way to challenge your imagination as anthropomorphic, not by including otherness into your modality of seeing, but by saying that otherness is so powerful that it can be the starting point of otherness to grant the otherness, the potentiality of being human. So basically, you presume that otherness is always more human, even more human than us. So we are just one version of humanity, and there are a lot of versions of humanity. So basically, that creates a certain common denominator between incompatibility of species, between incompatibility of points of view. Not saying that, okay, we're humans, we're the most evolutionarily perfect species which can speak and have technology and science, but you can say there are a lot of versions of humanity. So let's see how to produce this capacity to imagine other kinds of humanities from other point of view, even without this shamanic background which is always at stake in there's the Castro thinking, but it's just granting this potential of otherness to acquire humanity. And in this sense, I think one important thing can be added. I really believe that when we speak about imagination as a certain power to understand otherness and to overstep certain boundaries that set by social structures of imagination, social structures of imaginary, we always need to think about dynamization of imaginary. So dynamization of the point of the imaginary, and in this sense, we can. I always recall the quote from Fichte, who says that the main feature of imagination is oscillation between determinate A and indeterminate B. So between determinacy and indeterminacy, he uses the word schweben, oscillate between. So basically, what you need to learn is a certain choreography of the change of the point of view, where you constantly lose clear contours of one vision, one possibility to observe objects and to discover another perspective, sometimes in motion, sometimes with blurred contours, without taking a fixed point of view. So in a way, when we speak about observation in this sense, the most interesting thing for me is to learn the new choreographies of movement, to see things in movement, to see things without having clear and determinate shape. So this is my kind of my trigger for observation, how to learn to see the moving things or things in the movement. I've been thinking a lot about spaces, and it's also heavily charged with the problem of imagination. We can start with Bachelard, for example, who says that every space has a certain rhythm that produces the regime of imagination. And basically, there is a poetics of space, which relies on the rhythmicality embedded within the space. So You know, I even had an idea that I could. I wanted to create a certain environment, a certain building for the imagination, for the certain regime of imagination. And in Bachelard, it's the regime of vertical imagination. So because you have ways to approach things and to approach modalities, how you imagine things based on your rhythm. So if you move around in the horizontal rhythm, that's more or less your circadic approach, your everyday approach, and you conceive as well as imagine things in, so let's say, ordinary manner. But whenever you want to kind of create a certain break within that normal horizontality of your perception, you need to verticalize both your vision and gaze, but also your imagination. And if in terms of motricity, you can see that whenever you raise your head and you look at stars without that romantic assumption that, you know, it's so beautiful to see the sky, whatever, or Kantian approach, you know, on the problem of ethics and morality. But, you know, even kinesthetically, you know, in terms of your motorical movement, whenever you raise your head and you observe the sky, it's so unnatural in a way, you know, because human beings are very horizontal. You know, the vision, you know better than me, you know, the range of the vision within an architecture is very limited, you know, because you observe what, you know, like 2 meters, and then from the horizon maybe more, but then it's like, you know, that perspective. So basically you are not used to looking upwards or downwards too much. So I thought of a certain structure or architecture that would both enable but also to provoke you to look that you know, vertical way, or maybe even other ways. So you would work with your motricity of imagination in that sense. But going to the problem of chance, of course, it is very relevant to the contemporary debates on realism. And we can think of Quentin Meillassoux, who proposed difference between contingency and chance in his concept of potentiality and virtuality. So potentiality presupposes the idea of chance, where you can say that you have the limited amount of choices, 1 of 6 out of the dice that has been thrown. You know, so the chance is based on the idea of dice, which is also in many Latin languages, like in French, in Italian, in Portuguese and others. You know, in many Latin languages, it literally refers to the idea of being given. You know, datum. Dice is what is dado, what is given. Dado, you know. So you are given a chance. And in this sense, architecture can function as a dice that has been rolled, you know, where you are given a certain number of chances to, you know, possibilities, let's say, you know, that you work with. Or on the other hand, what Meillassoux is trying to propose is the moment of absolute contingency, where basically there is no preconceived system of chances. So everything is possible, you know. Contingency, absolute contingency, goes beyond any system of possibilities. So, and that's an interesting point. And I think when you work with imagination, you have to have this drive for contingency, because that's what the liberation, emancipation of imagination is about. You know, the drive for contingency, something absolutely other than you're given. So what is left outside the horizon of the given chances? What is beyond that? And it's, for me, it's very interesting that that's almost an impossible challenge for architecture in a way, because architecture is so powerful because it's very material, and being a material, okay, not always, of course. You can have research architecture, you can have a experimental architecture, but whatever. But still, it aims at the materiality that is at stake. But these days, I think these implications of different types of architecture, of thinking, you know, of architecture as a certain environment, you know, as a milieu. Maybe we will come closer to that concept as well. The moment of contingency, or that absolutely other, might occur as not as a moment of going outside this, you know, system of possibilities, let's say present in our planet, on our planet, but let's say as a system of relations that have not been activated here and now. So for Meilsu, you know, I think it's a kind of escapism. You know, you go beyond here and now, so you reach the ancestrality. You kind of go beyond all the laws of nature, and you confront this human problem and so on. But for me, I would go rather opposite direction, and would search for the multiplicity and the subtlety of relations that are not indicated within the system of dices that have been thrown, you know. So basically, it's not that the horizon is endless, but that the cosmology is here now, and the milieu is about the endless openings of relations that have been not displayed here and now. And that's, I think, a very even more complicated question, because it requires a lot of work to be done without escaping the place you find yourself in. I have to say that most lately, maybe for a few years, I've been extremely driven by the idea of milieu. And it's almost funny that I discovered the question of milieu through the analysis of different theories of imagination. And of course, Gilbert Simondon is the named figure in this endeavor, because he was the one who in 65, 66 delivered the lectures in Sorbonne entitled Imagination et Invention, Imagination at Invention. And he described imagination in those lectures as the process of individual and milieu interchange. So basically, when you speak of imagination, you cannot use the framework of distanciation from the world, you know, so which is a very common understanding. When I imagine, I close my eyes, you know, but he proposed the idea of integration into the milieu, and that, I think, it's a groundbreaking idea. You know, to think that to imagine is to dissolve or to integrate into what surrounds you. And he had this framework. I wrote an article which is about to be published on this, because there is no, there's only relatively few work that has been done, and his theory has been poorly analyzed so far. But in that article, I tried to show that he kind of exposes the genetic and circular idea of imagination, where basically when you imagine, you indulge yourself into the circular process of the genetic change, of the genesis, where image is not the representation, but rather the relation. So when you imagine, you can have different modalities of connectivities. You know, you connect with an environment, you connect with basically with a milieu. And this is how I discovered that we need to think about milieus in a better way in order to understand what does he imply when he says milieu, you know, and I kind of started to analyze the theories of milieu, and there is this famous article by Georg Fassl, The Living Being and Its Milieu, where he exposes the history of milieu. And interestingly enough, the concept of milieu has been was born in the context of biology and also in Newton in mechanics, and it was always and it has different, you know, changes. I don't want to go there because it's very complicated history, but it has gained its importance, especially in polemics between Lamarck and Darwin. You know. Polemics on evolution. So what does it mean to be a milieu within a milieu? Does it have only, let's say, can milieu be conceived as something alien from the organism, or is it a part of the organism? You know, and what forces are at stake? And when we speak about this, you know, so for instance, Darwin was the one who introduced the moment of the social element of milieu. You know, there is a social milieu of competition for the best to survive in order, you know, for to understand how the organism is evolving. So basically, the milieu is, in the broadest sense, is the place of evolution, is the place of change. You know, so that's why when you think of milieu, it's not an abstract space. It's never a geometrical space. It's the presupposition for the change to happen, you know? And later on, of course, it moved from biology to the context of philosophy with Canguilhem and Simondon. For Canguilhem puts it in this way, that there are, you know, cells and organisms and bacteria which live inside the milieu. So inside our body, for example, are out of bacteria, and they are surrounded by this milieu, but they also constitute the milieu for us themselves. So we are milieu for bacteria, but bacteria, in a certain sense, you know, is a milieu for us. How we find ourselves in certain circumstances. So what we speak of milieu, and this is also from Simondon, we need to speak about certain relationality. You know, milieu is encompassing the concreteness of relations. You cannot go beyond the milieu without taking into account that you are cutting certain relations. So basically, when you abstract the space out of milieu, you cut the relations out of it. You abduct the relations, you know. So in this sense, milieu cannot be understood in Euclidean geometrical sense. It's both spatio-temporal, but it's also relational in many ways. You know, it's not only biological, social, but as well, if you want, digital, geopolitical. You can include many moments. You know, speaking from Latourian perspective, let's say. And one important thing that has been also pointed out in this polemics of milieu through Canguilhem to Simondon is that you absolutely cannot understand a milieu if you apply the structure of symmetry. Actually, that has been done, and it's interesting. That has been done in, for instance, in Auguste Comte. Auguste Comte proposes the idea of milieu as interaction between variables and functions of organisms. So you can kind of deduce what kind of functions the organism will assume if you realize what are the variables of environment. So it's mathematics, you know, you calculate. These are the variables, this is the function, you know, and meaning this is the essence of the organism if you extract the function. But for Simondon, milieu is absolutely heterogeneous. It's the heterogeneity of individual, and he uses that idea of potential energy coming from physics. That potential energy is only possible because of the fringe, that interaction between heterogeneous realms, you know. So basically, you carry your heterogeneity with you within the concept of associated milieu as your potentiality, as the factor that conditions you and empowers you, but also imposes certain limitations. And this is a constant negotiation about relations. When you think about milieu, you negotiate through relationality. You negotiate your relations. So then coming back to the question of imagination, you can say that there are a lot of relations present that you don't see, you don't observe, you don't realize of being there. Because milieu is primarily invisible. It's like, you know, environment. Environment is invisible. So if you start dealing with the milieu, when you kind of catalyze those relations and you start imagining them, you get into contact with that relations, you actualize them, you extract them, you know, you select them, so all these modalities are the modalities of creativity, because you are created by the milieu and milieu creates you, meaning that you need, in order these relations to be present, you need a certain tension. So, you know, all this dynamics, for me, it turned out to be groundbreaking in a way, because I'm working for this direction, thinking of milieu and as a, let's say, as a vehicle and the mortar of imagination, which is embedded in the concreteness of being here now. I think how to live means, for me, provokes another question, how to learn, and that provokes another question, how to imagine. So how to learn and imagine, I think that's kind of encapsulating my current path, because when I started to think of the problem of a milieu, I kind of, the beauty of this problem for me is that I find it a very useful tool that can be calibrated in different manner in different fields. And of course, it addresses the problem of life primarily, you know, milieu and living being. So it's the milieu of something that should be living, but that also includes the elements that are not necessarily alive, and also that questions the boundary between things that are living and they're not alive. You know, what do they mean by the very concept of life? Because the milieu is also maybe the air, the salinity of water, the climatological surrounding, and so on. You know, so basically, milieu does not milieu eliminates the polarity between life and non-life. So both parts are important, and I think you need to learn this. The only problem with milieu is that it's the closest environment that has not been accessed by you or accessed by any, especially human living beings, by really concretizing it, by really gaining its value. So that's why you, in order to live and in trying to understand how to live, you need to learn your milieu. Paradoxically, you don't understand your milieu because you're never taking it into consideration. It's too close. That's why Simondon calls it associated milieu. You are so associated with the milieu that you don't even realize that it is present. That there is this beautiful quote in Sopranos, where Soprano the junior says, some people are so behind in the race that they don't even they even think that they are leading. You know, so it's actually the situation with the milieu. You think it doesn't exist, and you are the only living being that is exposed here. Where are you behind it? You've been created by it. You know, it's always one step forward. And in that sense, you need to learn how to deal with it. Paradoxically, because it's always there, but you don't understand it. And that's why you need to exercise your powers of imagination, because it's invisible, because it's not present, because it's even not representable, and because it's changing its shape whenever you take different perspective and different position. You know, and so, for instance, I get into dialogue, let's say, with Latour's concept of critical zones, where he says, okay, there is this thin layer of earth and climate, you know, where the life happens. But still, out of which perspective the critical zone is considered here, you know, interpreted here. The point is abstract. The point is like, we see some thin layer and okay, we need to zone it. Whereas the milieu is always about, when you say that I'm someone else's milieu, you need always to change the point of your perspective in order to see how you can redraw the limits of milieu. You know, the milieu recomposes every time you assume the different position of the living being. So from a point of bacteria, we are milieus in a way, but they are milieus for us. So and the world recomposes itself whenever you locate, you know, this Gestalt theory example. You know, what is the backdrop and what is the figure? So basically, it's only the question of perspective, of refocusing the gaze. So this exercise of learning and imagining is also the question regarding the ways of living. You know, how to live is how to learn and how to imagine being in the milieu.